that this order, we're focused on the finality that this order gives Ripple. We want to focus on continuing to grow our business both globally and domestically.
So let's get into this, because what we're hearing right now is something that could shake up not just Ripple or Hedera, but the way institutions interact with digital assets across the board. The rumor, or at least the emerging narrative, is that Ripple's custody wallet, the one that's been designed to handle institutional-scale assets, is now extending support for HBAR. And not just in a simple, let's store this token way, but through something being described as a shared MPC model. Now, for anyone following the custody wars in crypto, that's a big deal. Think about it like this: custody is where the real battle for institutional adoption is being fought in 2025. Forget hype coins or retail trading mania. If BlackRock, Fidelity, or even sovereign wealth funds are going to move billions into this space, they need ironclad custody solutions. Ripple already saw this coming years ago, which is why their custody wallet is positioned to be more than just another digital vault. It's built with compliance in mind, it's meant to scale, and it's already trusted by banks and payment providers who care more about stability than speculation. Now layer Hedera into that picture. For years, people have debated whether Ripple and Hedera are competitors. Ripple has the reputation of being the bank-friendly, payments-focused blockchain, while Hedera carved out its lane as the enterprise-grade, council-governed DLT for tokenization, sustainability, and massive throughput. But here's the twist. What if they were never meant to compete at all? What if the future is about synergy? If Ripple custody wallets start supporting HBAR directly, that means an entirely new class of institutional money could flow into Hedera without friction. No complicated integrations, no sketchy third-party custody providers. It would be Ripple's infrastructure giving a green light. Now, let's talk briefly about MPC multi-party computation. I won't go too technical, but imagine instead of one person holding the keys to a wallet, multiple parties each hold a piece of the puzzle. No one can move assets alone. That already adds security and reduces risks. But this shared MPC model that's being talked about, that suggests something bigger. It suggests that Ripple's custody system and Hedera's infrastructure aren't just passively linked, but actively cooperating in a way where control, security, and verification are distributed. That's not just about storage, that's about interoperability. That's about creating a framework where cross-chain assets could be secured, managed, and even transacted without ever leaving the custody environment. Think about the implications of that for a second. If you're an institution, maybe a bank in Singapore or a fund in New York, and you want exposure to both XRP and HBAR, or maybe even tokenized assets running on Hedera, you don't want to manage two entirely separate custody systems. You want one portal, one infrastructure that can handle it all with regulatory compliance baked in. Ripple offering that, with Hedera right there in the mix, would make it infinitely easier for institutions to actually deploy capital. And that's the part people often forget. Institutions don't just need technology. They need simplicity. They need risk minimized. They need trust. And Ripple has been building that narrative for a decade. So already, just from this one rumor, you can see how the story begins to form. It's not about Ripple versus Hedera. It's about Ripple plus Hedera. It's about Ripple extending its institutional credibility into Hedera's enterprise ecosystem, and in the process, potentially unlocking a new flow of liquidity for HBAR. If that's the case, then this isn't just another headline. This could be the quiet start of something that fundamentally changes how these networks are perceived in the global digital asset landscape. Here's where things get really interesting. When people first hear Ripple custody wallet now supporting HBAR, their reaction might just be, okay, so another token is added? What's the big deal? But that surface-level view misses the entire depth of what this could mean, not just for Ripple and Hedera, but for the entire digital asset ecosystem moving into 2025 and beyond. Because at the core of this story isn't just support, it's about how custody itself is being redefined, and that's where the shared MPC model comes into play. Custody has always been the gatekeeper in crypto. In the early days, people thought custody just meant keeping your coins safe from hackers. But when institutional players showed up, the conversation changed. Suddenly, custody wasn't just about security, it was about compliance, regulatory recognition, and operational efficiency. Institutions wanted cold storage, insurance, and auditing, not just private keys in a hardware wallet. That's why custody providers like Anchorage, Fireblocks, and BitGo became household names in the institutional crypto world. And Ripple's entrance into this space was never about being just another provider. It was about setting up infrastructure that speaks the language of Wall Street and central banks. Now imagine Ripple deciding that HBAR, specifically, deserves to be added into that framework. You have to ask why. Because Ripple could choose any token. They could add Cardano, they could add Polkadot, they could add Dogecoin if they really wanted. But they went with Hedera, and the rumor says they're doing it in a way that ties into their MPC custody infrastructure. That hints at something deeper than just, let's expand the menu. It hints at alignment. It hints at the idea that Ripple sees Hedera as an asset that institutions are already eyeing, and that the demand is strong enough to justify building secure custody support at the highest level. Let's take a moment to break down MPC for those who might not fully grasp why it matters. Multi-party computation is essentially about splitting private key responsibilities across multiple entities. Instead of having one custodian hold the full key and therefore being a single point of failure, MPC allows different parties to hold different shards of the key. Only when these shards work together can a transaction be authorized. That means a hacker can't just breach one server and run off with funds. It also means insiders can't just decide to move assets on their own. Security becomes collaborative, and that collaboration builds trust. But here's the thing, this rumor specifically says, shared MPC model. That phrase is different. It suggests something even bigger than the standard approach. Shared MPC implies that not just Ripple's custody platform, but also Hedera's own infrastructure, are part of that security and verification framework. In other words, the custody doesn't just exist outside of the blockchain, but is actively tied into it. That's where the implications start getting massive. Think about how fragmented the crypto world still is. You've got XRP operating on its own ledger, HBAR running on the Hedera Hashgraph network, stablecoins on Ethereum, tokenized assets popping up on private blockchains, and then you have traditional custodians still storing things in siloed systems. Nothing feels unified. But if Ripple is able to leverage a shared MPC model with Hedera, what you're actually looking at is one of the first real attempts at unified custody across different ecosystems. It's not just about holding assets anymore, it's about bridging them in a secure way, where interoperability is built into the very act of custody. That's why this rumor carries so much weight. Because it's not just about Ripple making a technical upgrade, it's about Ripple positioning itself at the center of institutional-grade interoperability. Let's say you're a bank that wants to custody tokenized carbon credits on Hedera, while also holding XRP for cross-border liquidity. Right now, you'd need separate integrations, separate custodians, and a mess of operational complexity. But with a shared MPC custody solution, Ripple could offer you one interface, one compliance framework, and one streamlined way to manage it all. That's the holy grail for institutions. Simplicity without sacrificing security. And it doesn't stop there. Let's talk incentives. Ripple has always had its eye on being the go-to provider for financial institutions. Hedera has always leaned into enterprises and tokenization use cases like supply chain tracking, healthcare data integrity, carbon credits, and real-world assets. Their target customers are almost identical: banks, governments, Fortune 500 companies. If both networks are speaking to the same audience, it only makes sense that their infrastructures begin to align. Custody is just the first touch point, the first obvious overlap where cooperation delivers value. But once that door is open, you can start imagining the bigger picture. Joint liquidity flows, shared settlement layers, and even coordinated regulatory lobbying. People sometimes underestimate how important symbolism is in this space. Remember when PayPal added Bitcoin years ago? It wasn't just about letting people buy a little BTC inside the app. It was the symbolic green light that said, this asset class is safe enough for a mainstream platform. That single move drove adoption waves because it legitimized Bitcoin in the eyes of millions. Ripple adding HBAR to custody with shared MPC could have a similar effect, except this time the audience isn't retail investors, it's global institutions. It's the green light that says, Hedera is safe enough to be custodied alongside XRP in a bank-grade infrastructure. That's not just symbolic, that's catalytic. Of course, we should also talk about timing. Why now? The rumor says this integration is either happening or in motion in 2025, and that timing is not random. We're living through a year where regulatory clarity is rapidly unfolding in the US, with exemptions being created, new market structure bills coming into play, and stablecoins finally being federally recognized. This is exactly the kind of environment where institutions feel more comfortable stepping into crypto, and they're going to need custody solutions that align with those new rules. Ripple knows that, Hedera knows that, and if they're aligning custody solutions now, it means they're positioning themselves for the next cycle of institutional adoption. So when you look at this rumor in context, it's not just a headline. It's a signal. It's Ripple quietly laying the tracks for a future where Hedera isn't just another altcoin in the background, but a fully integrated piece of the institutional digital asset machine. The shared MPC model isn't just about better custody. It's about shared trust, shared infrastructure, and shared future between two networks that have always seemed like cousins in the enterprise blockchain space. If this really comes to fruition, we could be looking back in a few years and saying, that custody integration was the moment everything changed. Here's where the conversation starts to heat up even more, because once you begin connecting Ripple custody support for HBAR with institutional adoption, you're no longer just talking about infrastructure. You're talking about money flows. And in crypto, money flows are everything. They dictate liquidity, market confidence, and ultimately price action. So let's really break this down. When institutions step into crypto, they don't care about hype coins or meme tokens. They care about security, regulatory alignment, and scalability. Those three words drive every decision. And that's exactly why this shared MPC custody rumor matters so much, because it speaks directly to those institutional needs. Security? Check. Ripple's custody platform already offers bank-grade protections. Regulatory alignment? Check. Ripple has spent years fighting and finally winning its legal battles in the US, while Hedera has been working with governing councils full of Fortune 500 companies. Scalability? Double check. Hedera's Hashgraph technology was designed for high throughput and low fees, while Ripple's ledger has always been efficient at settlement. Combine these strengths, and suddenly you have an institutional product that feels less like crypto and more like the financial rails of the future. Now, let's talk liquidity. One of the major choke points in this industry has always been siloed liquidity pools. Bitcoin liquidity is on one side, Ethereum liquidity on another, and everything else fractured across dozens of chains. For institutions, that fragmentation is a nightmare. If they want to move value between assets, they need to go through exchanges, OTC desks, or custom integrations. It's messy, costly, and risky. But imagine if Ripple's custody platform, using shared MPC with Hedera, allowed for seamless reallocation of liquidity between XRP and HBAR inside the same custody framework. No more external bridges, no more counterparty risks with sketchy exchanges. Just one unified liquidity pool managed at the custody layer. That's a game changer. Think about what that means for XRP first. Ripple has always pitched XRP as a liquidity token for cross-border settlement. The problem has never been the technology. It's been adoption and depth of liquidity. Banks need deep pools to move billions, not thin markets that get slippage from a $10 million trade. By integrating HBAR custody into the same ecosystem, Ripple essentially invites Hedera's liquidity into the same room as XRP. That doesn't mean the assets merge, but it does mean they become part of the same institutional pipeline. Liquidity begets liquidity, and the more assets supported in a unified, compliant custody model, the stronger XRP's liquidity profile becomes. Now flip it and look at HBAR. For years, Hedera has had incredible tech but struggled with visibility and retail excitement. The governing council is impressive: Google, IBM, Boeing, Standard Bank, LG, and so many others, but to the average retail trader that never translated into hype. Price action has been muted compared to other altcoins. But institutions don't care about hype. They care about trust and partnerships. If Ripple custody gives them a secure, regulatory-friendly way to hold HBAR, then suddenly HBAR enters the same tier of legitimacy as XRP in the eyes of institutional money. That's not just narrative. That's capital allocation. It's the kind of move that could create a demand shock for HBAR as institutions quietly start building positions. Here's something most people don't think about. price doesn't always move because of loud headlines. Sometimes it moves because of silent accumulation. If Ripple custody integrates HBAR, it's unlikely you'll see every hedge fund blasting press releases about their buys. Instead, they'll quietly start adding HBAR to balance sheets alongside XRP as part of tokenized asset strategies. Maybe it's for carbon credits. Maybe it's for enterprise applications. Maybe it's just to have exposure in case of future demand. But that silent accumulation builds a floor, and floors are what sustain long-term price appreciation. Now, from a macro view, the shared MPC custody model could actually serve as a precursor to something even bigger: interoperability of settlement. Imagine Ripple's on-demand liquidity using XRP to bridge fiat currencies, while Hedera provides infrastructure for tokenized assets like carbon credits or supply chain data. If both assets live under the same custody roof, the path to connecting them operationally is much shorter. That means we could see cross-settlement flows where XRP is used for liquidity and HBAR is used for enterprise utility, working side by side. That kind of synergy is rare in crypto, where most chains compete instead of cooperate. And let's not forget the psychology of institutions. When one big player makes a move, others often follow. If Ripple custody announces HBAR support, you can bet that at least some banks, funds, or corporates will take a fresh look at Hedera. It's a signal that the asset is no longer fringe. It's safe enough for Ripple to back. And once a few start moving, the rest don't want to be left behind. That herd mentality could drive a cascading effect of institutional adoption. All of this ties directly into the price narrative for both XRP and HBAR. For XRP, it reinforces its position as the institutional liquidity token of choice. Every new integration makes it harder for competitors to catch up. For HBAR, it injects exactly what it's been missing: institutional credibility and a clear pipeline for liquidity inflows. The combination could set both tokens up for a dual rally, not because of retail hype cycles, but because of steady, sustained institutional demand. And those kinds of rallies, while slower, tend to last much longer and build stronger foundations. Now, is there risk? Of course. Rumors aren't guarantees, and even if custody support comes, it doesn't mean trillions will flood in overnight. Adoption takes time, regulations evolve, and institutions move cautiously. But make no mistake, custody is the first domino. Without custody, nothing else can scale. With custody, everything else becomes possible. That's why this rumor, if true, is so important. It's not just another token listing. It's infrastructure being built for the next wave of capital. So the big picture here is clear. Ripple custody support for HBAR under a shared MPC model isn't just a technical upgrade. It's the quiet birth of an institutional liquidity bridge. It sets the stage for XRP to deepen its role as global settlement liquidity, and for HBAR to finally step into the institutional spotlight it's been preparing for all these years. Together, they don't just coexist, they reinforce each other, creating a feedback loop of adoption, liquidity, and price strength. And if you're watching closely, you'll see the writing on the wall. This could be the moment where two enterprise-driven projects finally converge into something bigger than either could achieve alone. So here's where things get interesting, and maybe a little uncomfortable for those who think it's all sunshine and moonshots with Ripple supporting HBAR through its custody wallet. Because while the headlines make it sound like a perfect marriage between Hedera and Ripple tech, the truth is that nothing in crypto ever comes without strings attached. First, let's talk about regulation. Ripple has been battling the SEC for years, and even though it has some major wins under its belt, that regulatory cloud hasn't fully disappeared. If Ripple's custody solutions end up under scrutiny again, guess what? Any token tied into that ecosystem, including HBAR, could see indirect pressure. It's not that Hedera itself is in legal hot water, but the optics of being closely tied to Ripple could create hesitation for institutions that don't want regulatory headaches. Now, shift the lens to competition. Ripple's wallet isn't the only game in town. Fireblocks, Anchorage, Coinbase custody, all of them are aggressively courting enterprises. HBAR being supported in Ripple's custody wallet is a big step, but it also locks Hedera into Ripple's orbit. That raises the question: is Hedera better off building a more diversified custody ecosystem, or is leaning on Ripple's infrastructure the smart shortcut? If Ripple's dominance grows, Hedera risks being just one of many assets in a crowded vault. Then there's the technical layer. Shared MPC, multi-party computation, sounds like a dream. No single point of failure, keys distributed across multiple entities, and high-grade institutional security. But anyone who's been in crypto long enough knows new tech always comes with caveats. MPC is resource-intensive, it's still relatively new compared to older custodial standards, and integration glitches are not unheard of. Imagine a bank onboarding HBAR through Ripple's custody platform and hitting a snag. Suddenly the narrative flips from, "Look how secure this is," to, "Why are we still dealing with crypto headaches?" Perception matters, and one bad rollout can tarnish adoption momentum. And let's not forget adoption risk. The big talking point is always institutional capital. But institutions move like glaciers, not like retail traders chasing meme coins. Just because Ripple custody now supports HBAR doesn't mean JP Morgan or BlackRock is loading up tomorrow. It's a long courtship process, with compliance departments, risk assessments, and boardroom sign-offs. The danger here is overhyping the news. If expectations run too high, the reality of slow adoption could frustrate holders and dampen price action in the short term. Finally, there's an almost philosophical angle. By tying into Ripple custody, Hedera is signaling it's playing the institutional game. That's great for legitimacy, but it could alienate the grassroots, decentralization-first crowd that helped crypto get here in the first place. People might start to see HBAR less as a community-driven, innovative layer 1 and more as just another tool in the big bank's toolbox. So yes, Ripple custody support is a big deal, but it's not without its shadows. It's one of those moments where you have to weigh the trade-offs. Institutional trust versus independence, speed of adoption versus risk of dependency, regulatory optics versus technical innovation. So, stepping back for a moment, what does all this really mean? Ripple custody supporting HBAR isn't just another crypto headline. It's a signal. It tells us the lines between major blockchain players are blurring, and collaboration might be the new competition. It also reminds us that if institutions are going to trust digital assets, they need frameworks like shared MPC to feel secure. Ripple offering that to HBAR is both a validation of Hedera's potential and a challenge for it to rise to the occasion. Will this rumor play out exactly the way people think? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact that the conversation even exists shows how seriously HBAR is being considered in the institutional arena. That's not noise. That's momentum. And if you're watching this channel, you already know momentum is what moves markets. So whether you're an HBAR fan, a Ripple supporter, or just someone curious about where crypto custody is headed, now's the time to pay attention. If you found this breakdown useful, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives like this, and drop a comment below. Do you think Ripple custody support for HBAR is the real deal, or just another rumor? Let's talk about it.